I never thought I would see the day when the person I trusted most would look me in the eye and use the one thing I loved above all else, our children, as a weapon against me. I had always believed that no matter how broken a marriage became, the love for the children would stand as sacred ground, untouchable. But I was wrong, very wrong. And the moment he threatened to take them away, my world cracked in a way I never imagined possible. I was not a woman chasing grand dreams for myself. My dreams had always worn smaller, gentler shapes. They looked like warm breakfasts before school, like sitting through endless recitals and football games, like bandaging scraped knees and tucking blankets tightly on cold nights. My identity was wrapped in motherhood, and I was proud of that. People in the community knew me as the mother who never missed a meeting, the woman who gave her whole heart to raising good children. My husband, on the other hand, was known as a respectable man, ambitious, well-dressed, the one who smiled broadly in public, shaking hands as if he had nothing to hide. Behind closed doors, though, his smile didn't last as long. He was colder, sharper, always needing control, always reminding me that I owed my life to him. He provided the roof, he made the money, he believed that gave him the right to decide everything. I told myself for years that this was just how some men were, that as long as the children were safe and healthy, I could swallow my discomfort. But the more I swallowed, the smaller I became. At family gatherings, he liked to paint the picture of perfection. He would pull my hand and kiss my cheek in front of everyone, calling me his rock. People would tell me I was lucky to have such a man. But what no one saw was how quickly his voice would change when we were alone, how often he would remind me of my dependence. My silence became a shield, and that silence was what kept peace in the house. Or at least, that's what I thought. The threat came quietly one night, in the middle of a regular argument. His tone was low, almost casual, but the words pierced deeper than any scream. "If you don't stop questioning me, I'll take the kids. They'll be better off with me anyway." For a moment, I thought I misheard him. But the way he looked at me, calm, cold, certain, told me he meant every word. And in that instant, I felt my chest tighten as if all the air had been stolen from the room. What would I be without my children? They were not just part of my life, they were my life. The idea that someone could strip them from me, not because of unfitness, not because of danger, but as punishment, was something I could never comprehend. Yet that was the reality standing before me. A man who once vowed to love and protect me had transformed into the very person who could destroy me in the cruelest way possible. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the children who trusted me to keep their world safe. I realized in that moment that silence had protected his control, but it had endangered the one thing I could never lose. If you've ever felt like someone tried to silence your voice or use what you loved most as leverage, hit like and subscribe. This story will speak directly to your heart. I stood there that night replaying his words, wondering if he believed I would crumble under the weight of his threats. Perhaps he thought fear would keep me obedient forever. But a question kept echoing inside me, burning hotter each time. I repeated it. What happens when the person who should protect your family turns into the one trying to tear it apart? From the outside, my life looked like a well-framed portrait, a comfortable home, children neatly dressed for school, and a husband who seemed to work tirelessly to provide for us. People in the neighborhood whispered words like perfect family when they saw us walking into church together. Our smiles painted carefully for the public eye. But behind the door, behind the smiles, there was a truth no one ever asked about, and I was too ashamed or too loyal to tell. My life was built on sacrifices, little ones at first. I gave up my hobbies, thinking motherhood and marriage demanded all my attention. Then came bigger sacrifices, friendships that faded away because I couldn't always explain why I couldn't go out. Dreams of pursuing my own career silenced by his constant reminders that my place was at home. He called it devotion, but over time it became erasure. I disappeared piece by piece, all while convincing myself that it was noble, that it was what good wives and good mothers did. The irony is that the more invisible I became, the more he thrived. His confidence grew as mine withered. He would stand taller when he reminded me how much I depended on him. At dinner parties, he'd joke about how I couldn't manage finances without him, how I was too soft to make hard decisions. People laughed, and I laughed too, because what else could I do? Correct him, expose him. That would only earn me hours of cold silence or cutting remarks once we got home. So I swallowed the humiliation, convinced that protecting the children's sense of stability mattered more than protecting my own dignity. What I didn't realize then was that every time I silenced myself, I gave him more power. He learned that he could belittle me without consequence, that my love for the children would always keep me compliant, and so my sacrifices became his weapons. When he wanted me quiet, he reminded me how lucky I was to have him. When I questioned him, he threatened to strip away the very things I lived for our children. And because I had given up so much already, I was terrified he might actually succeed. There were moments, though quiet flashes, when I saw how invisible I had become. Like when the children asked him permission for things they should have asked me. Or when I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My shoulders were slumped, my eyes carried exhaustion, not just from long days, but from years of being unseen, unheard, unvalued. I had turned myself into a shadow just to keep the peace, not realizing that shadows can't protect anyone, not even themselves. Still, I kept going. The children needed me, and I told myself that my silence was my strength, that my sacrifices were noble. That's the cruel trick of invisibility. You tell yourself it's a choice until you realize it's a cage. And it was inside that cage while trying to convince myself I was doing the right thing, that his threats gained power. Because he knew exactly how much I had lost of myself, and how much I clung to the children as the only pieces of me left. He thought that would keep me small forever. But here's the truth. When someone tries to erase you completely, when someone turns your silence into their weapon, there comes a point when the very thing they use against you becomes your reason to fight back. Stay tuned. Sometimes the smallest detail can unravel the biggest secret. Don't forget, hit like and subscribe if you've ever been made to feel invisible. Your support keeps these stories alive. I often wonder how many women are walking through life unseen, convinced their sacrifices are enough to hold everything together. And yet, the question that haunts me is this: have you ever ignored red flags because your loyalty blinded you to the truth? There comes a moment in every story of silence where the silence itself becomes too heavy to bear, and mine arrived like a storm I didn't see coming. For years, I had learned to shrink myself, to smile when I wanted to scream, to nod in agreement when I knew deep down my thoughts didn't matter to him. I had convinced myself that peace was worth the price of my voice. But the truth is, peace built on silence is nothing but a ticking bomb. And the explosion came one night in the most ordinary of ways. It started with a fight over nothing, or at least that's what it looked like on the surface. It's a forgotten errand, a misplaced bill, something so small that most couples would have brushed it aside. But in our house, small things were fuel for his cruelty. His words cut sharper than knives, that I was useless, that without him I wouldn't survive a single day, that even our children would eventually see how weak and incapable their mother really was. And as those words left his lips, I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't sudden rage. It was a quiet but powerful realization. He wanted me to believe that I couldn't exist without him. That night, after he slammed the door and left me trembling in the kitchen, I sat in silence. But it was a different kind of silence. For the first time, I wasn't swallowing it. I was listening to it. And in that silence, I asked myself a question I had been too afraid to face. What if he's wrong? What if I can survive? Not just survive, but thrive without him. The breaking point wasn't a single scream or a dramatic confrontation. It was the quiet awakening that his control depended on my fear, and if I could break free from that fear, then he would lose his power. I looked around the house, the same walls that had witnessed years of my humiliation. Instead of seeing them as a cage, I began to see them as proof. Proof that I had kept this family together, that I had sacrificed endlessly, that I had endured storms that would have broken others. If I could do all that in silence, imagine what I could do with my voice. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the children too. Realized they were watching, learning what love was supposed to look like, learning what respect was supposed to sound like. And in that moment, I knew, if I kept living in silence, I wasn't protecting them. I was teaching them that it was normal. That love looked like control. That family meant erasure. That silence was the only way to keep peace. And that thought shook me more than any insult he had ever thrown at me. I could no longer pretend. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, the same mirror that had shown me a stranger for years, and I forced myself to look. My reflection was tired, yes, but there was a fire in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. That was the moment I decided, no more shrinking. No more silence. He had built his power on my invisibility, but I would no longer disappear for him. The breaking point wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. Because once you realize you've been surviving all along, the fear of living without them suddenly feels smaller than the fear of continuing with them. Discovery rarely comes in one single thunderbolt. Sometimes it's a trail of crumbs, so small that you almost convince yourself you're imagining things. But the truth has a way of slipping through cracks. And mine began with something as innocent as a message notification on a phone he thought I'd never see. One evening, while he showered, the screen lit up with a name I recognized all too well, my own sister's. At first, I brushed it off. After all, family talks. But the words that scrolled across that screen were not the words of siblings' law. They were loaded, intimate, dripping with secrets no husband should ever be sharing with his wife's sister. I froze, staring at that screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. For years, I had carried the silence of my own humiliation, convincing myself I was protecting my children, preserving what little peace we had left. But now, the silence shattered under the weight of undeniable betrayal. My husband had chosen the one person he knew would break me the most. Not a stranger, not a passing fling, but my sister, the woman I grew up protecting, the one I trusted to hold my hand through life. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was layered with cruelty, as though the years of silence hadn't been enough punishment. He had weaponized family, twisted loyalty, and turned love into something poisonous. Reading those messages, I saw a reality that had existed right under my nose. The late nights, the sudden trips, the private laughs they shared at gatherings. The puzzle pieces fell into place, and the picture they painted was unbearable. What broke me wasn't only his actions, but hers. My sister had sat across from me at dinner tables, had hugged me on holidays, had promised me she would always be by my side. And yet she had been sharpening the knife with every smile, waiting for the moment to plunge it into my back. That kind of betrayal doesn't just bruise its scars in places no one else can see. And yet, as I stood there with his phone in my trembling hands, another realization hit me. This wasn't just about their betrayal. It was about the years I had allowed myself to disappear, to stay quiet, to play the role of the good wife, the understanding woman, the selfless protector. Silence had cost me too much already, and now it was demanding my very soul. For the first time in years, anger felt cleaner than fear. It wasn't just rage at them. It was rage at myself for being blind, for letting loyalty blindfold me when the signs were screaming. That night, I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I sat with the truth. I replayed every moment in my mind, the glances exchanged, the moments that once seemed harmless, the excuses that didn't add up. Suddenly, it all made sense. Betrayal doesn't always shout at whispers in shadows, waiting until you're brave enough to see. And I was finally brave enough. When he came out of the shower, dripping arrogance as if nothing had changed, I looked at him differently. He didn't notice. That's the irony of men who underestimate women. They never realize the moment we stop believing the lies. He spoke, laughed, moved through the house as if the walls hadn't just caved in, as if his world was safe. But what he didn't know was that mine was no longer built on silence. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. Instead, I decided to collect, to prepare, to turn the very weapon of truth he tried to bury into my shield. Betrayal had burned me, yes, but it also awakened me. And that awakening was more dangerous to him than any fury he had ever seen. Confrontation is not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet before the storm that rattles the ground more than any scream. For days, I carried the truth in silence. I walked around him, studied his movements, listened to his words, but no longer as a wife clinging to his promises. I observed him like a stranger, calculating, measuring, waiting. My sister still came by, smiling as if her lips weren't dripping with deceit. They thought they had control. They thought I was still the same woman who swallowed pain and disguised it with smiles. What they didn't know was that I had already begun rehearsing the day their lies would collapse. That day came sooner than they expected. It was at a family dinner, one of those evenings where everyone gathered around a table heavy with food and forced laughter. He was at the head, my sister on the side, her laugh echoing too loudly at his stories. Their eyes brushed, and though no one else noticed, I saw it with painful clarity. The intimacy, the familiarity, the secret language only they shared. Something inside me snapped. I had prepared, I had strategized, but betrayal has a way of pushing patience into fire. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound piercing the room like a warning bell. Every face turned to me. I looked at him, then at her, and I asked a simple question that sliced sharper than any accusation. How long have you been lying to me? Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Forks froze midair, conversations choked on unfinished words. My husband's face paled, his lips parted to form excuses, but no sound came out. My sister dropped her gaze, her hands trembling under the table, but it was too late. The room had already shifted. He tried first. Stumbling over denials, "You're imagining things," he said, his voice shaky, his usual confidence cracked. But when I pulled out the phone, the screen glowing with the messages I had saved, his mask disintegrated. The words, explicit and undeniable, filled the room with a silence that screamed louder than any shout. Gasps erupted. My family stared at him, then at her, the shock spreading like fire through dry wood. Still, he tried to twist the narrative. "It's not what it looks like," he said, desperation dripping from every syllable. "She came to me for comfort. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was weak." Weak. That was his excuse for betraying vows, for destroying trust, for desecrating family. He wanted pity. He wanted forgiveness without accountability. But weakness is not an accident, it's a choice. And my sister. She finally spoke, her voice trembling, tears brimming her eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered, as if betrayal could ever come without wounds. "It just happened." Those 3 words had just happened stabbed deeper than the affair itself. Nothing just happens. Choices happen. Lies happen. Betrayal is deliberate. In that moment, I realized the confrontation wasn't about exposing them to the world, it was about exposing them to themselves. For years, they had lived comfortably in the shadows, thinking my silence was their safety. But now the lights were on, and there was nowhere left to hide. The weight of truth shifted the balance of the room. He was no longer the respected husband. Okay. She was no longer the trusted sister. Okay. And I was no longer the silent woman who accepted her role as the background to their performance. The confrontation wasn't loud, but it was devastating. Every word I spoke, every truth I revealed, was a brick torn from the foundation of their fabricated world. And as their faces crumbled under the gaze of our family, I saw something else: fear. Fear of consequences. Fear of being seen for what they really were. And for the first time in years, I felt power surge through me. Not because I sought revenge, but because truth itself is the most unshakable weapon. Fallout is the moment when silence breaks into fragments and everyone is forced to see the wreckage. After the confrontation, the room felt colder, as if every wall had absorbed the weight of truth and was now pressing it back onto us. My husband sat with his head in his hands, muttering half-formed excuses that no one cared to hear anymore. My sisters, tears dripped silently into her lap. But they didn't draw sympathy, they drew contempt. Family members whispered, their voices low but sharp, cutting through the air with judgment that neither of them could escape. The respect, the trust, the admiration they had enjoyed for years, all of it shattered in one night, like glass splintering on the floor. But the fallout wasn't just theirs, it was mine too. Suddenly, I wasn't just a wife betrayed or a sister deceived. I became the center of pitying glances, of whispered reassurances, of people telling me I was strong, that I'd get through this. Strength is a strange thing. People praise you for it, but they don't understand the price it costs. They didn't see the nights I cried into my pillow, the mornings I forced myself to smile for the children, the years I silenced myself to keep the family whole. Strength isn't free, it's forged in fire, and that fire burns. In the days that followed, the whispers spread beyond the walls of that dinner table. Neighbors looked at me differently. Colleagues approached me with hesitant kindness. Our marriage had been a facade of perfection, one we paraded proudly for years. But now the truth was out, and facades never survive the light. My husband, once respected in the community, began to feel the sting of social exile. Invitations dried up, friendships vanished, and every glance carried a question he couldn't answer. He had not only destroyed our family, but also his reputation, his standing, the image he had polished so carefully. My sister faced her own storm. She became a ghost in family gatherings, no longer welcomed, her name spoken only in whispers. My parents, torn between daughters, couldn't mask their disappointment. The bond we once celebrated as unbreakable now lay in ruins, poisoned by deceit. For her, the fallout was isolation. For him, it was humiliation. For me, it was the painful process of rebuilding from rubble. But here's what they underestimated. Fallout doesn't just destroy. It reveals. It shows who will stand beside you when the dust settles and who will vanish into the smoke. Friends I thought were distant showed up at my door with meals, kind words, and open arms. Strangers who had once been background figures in my life became pillars of support. And slowly, I began to see that sometimes destruction clears the ground for something stronger to be built. Still, the nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, I'd hear the echo of his laughter with her, the way he defended her with the same lips that once promised to defend me. The images haunted me, clawed at my chest, made me question if silence would ever bring peace. But every morning I woke up, and my children's faces reminded me why I couldn't collapse. They didn't deserve to inherit my pain, they deserved to see resilience lived out loud. The fallout wasn't clean. It was messy, raw, unpredictable. Some days I wanted revenge. Other days I wanted to vanish. But more than anything, I wanted to reclaim the voice I had lost. And that realization began to fuel me. Cool. Because while they drowned in shame and excuses, I rose in truth. And truth, once spoken, has a way of multiplying its power. And so I ask you, if betrayal tore through your family, would you choose to let the fallout define your? Would you use it to rise stronger than before? I remember the weight of those nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how a man who once swore to protect me could become the same. One plotting to rip the very heart out of my chest. It wasn't about him wanting freedom or even about him moving on. No, this was about power. He wanted to punish me, to leave me hollow, to make sure the world believed I was nothing without him. And in his twisted plan, the cruelest weapon he could wield was my children. He thought that if he could take them away, I would collapse, that I would crumble into a version of myself that no one could recognize. But what he never understood is that a mother's strength isn't measured by convenience, but by survival. And that day, I decided that no matter what, I would not let him win. His arrogance blinded him. He believed his charm, his money, and his connections could build a case against me, painting me as unfit, unstable, incapable. He underestimated how much I had endured in silence. How many years I had spent carrying the weight of his betrayals and keeping the home together when he was busy tearing it apart. He thought that silence meant weakness. He thought my devotion meant stupidity. But silence can turn into strategy. And devotion, when betrayed, can turn into fire. The turning point came when I walked into the lawyer's office with every ounce of evidence I had gathered. Photos, receipts, messages, witness statements, it was all there, organized, undeniable. He expected me to be too broken, too scattered to fight back. But instead, I walked in with the calmness of someone who had already lost everything that mattered except the one thing I refused to surrender. My children. He had taken pieces of me over the years, chipped away at my dignity, humiliated me in ways only a husband knows how to do. But my children, that was where the line was drawn. That was where his power ended and mine began. I still remember his face when he realized I wasn't going to fold. He came to court with that smug look, the same expression he wore every time he thought he had outsmarted me. But when the evidence began to unfold, when his lies started tangling themselves in contradictions, the confidence melted from his face. He looked around as if searching for someone to rescue him, but no one came. The same people he thought would defend him chose silence. His own mask of respectability slipped, and in that silence I felt my voice return. For years I had been invisible in my own home. For years he spoke over me, made decisions without me, erased my presence with every cold dismissal. But in that courtroom, I was undeniable. My words mattered. My pain mattered. My truth finally had a place to breathe. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting for the narrative of my life, for the dignity he had tried to strip from me. The judge looked at me differently that day, not as a broken wife, but as a mother standing in her full strength. And my children, though too young to understand the details, would one day know that their mother did not surrender them to lies. They would know that I stood tall, that I fought back, that I didn't let their father's betrayal define the rest of our lives. The turning point wasn't just about winning custody. Was about reclaiming the voice I had buried under years of fear and silence. Was about proving to him, to myself, and to everyone watching that I was more than the shadows he tried to cast me in. He thought he could punish me, but in trying to break me, he exposed his own weakness. Because when you strip everything away from a woman who has already lost so much, what remains is unshakable strength. And here's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes you don't recognize your own power until someone tries to destroy the very thing you live for. That's when you discover that the fire inside you was never extinguished, was waiting for the moment you needed it most. So, when he tried to take my children, when he tried to erase me as their mother, he didn't realize that he was awakening a version of me he could never control. That was the day I refused to break, the day I decided that his lies would not be the legacy my children inherited. That was the day I chose to rise, even if it meant standing alone. Because the truth is, strength isn't born in comfort, it's forged in the moments when the world tries to silence you. And you decide to speak louder than ever before. And now, I ask you, you are pushed to your breaking point. If someone tried to take away the very reason you breathe, would you stay silent? Or would you fight with everything you had left? The silence after the storm is always the loudest. When the courtroom battle ended and the gavel came down, I didn't feel immediate relief. I didn't feel like cheering or running outside to celebrate. Instead, I stood there, almost frozen, as if my body didn't yet trust that it was safe to exhale. For so long, my life had been defined by conflict, by fear of what he would do next, by dread of how far he would go to break me. And suddenly, there was this space, this stillness where his power had once loomed. It was like waking up in the middle of a battlefield and realizing the war had ended, but you're still clutching your shield, waiting for the next blow. That first night, when I returned home, the house felt different. The walls no longer carried the echo of his voice. The shadows seemed lighter, less suffocating, but the emptiness was real. I had to face the truth that while I had won a critical fight, my life was in fragments. My finances were strained, my trust in people shattered, my sense of safety broken. Winning custody of my children was my victory, but it came at a cost. And yet, in that cost, I found clarity. The ashes left behind were not ruins. They were the foundation for something new. I poured my energy into my children. Every morning became a ritual of proving to them and to myself that we were not victims but survivors. I cooked their favorite breakfasts even when money was tight. I helped them with homework even when exhaustion pressed down on me. I tucked them in at night with promises that this time no one was going to take them away. They didn't need to know every detail of what happened, not yet. What they needed was stability, consistency, and the assurance that their mother wasn't going anywhere. And giving them that stability gave me back a sense of purpose that no betrayal could erase. But I won't lie, there were days when the weight felt unbearable. Days when I sat in the bathroom with the door locked, silently crying into a towel so my children wouldn't hear. Days when I questioned whether I could keep carrying it all alone. People often think strength means never breaking, but that's a lie. True strength is breaking into 1,000 pieces and then stubbornly gathering each shard to keep going anyway. That's what those days taught me. I could break, but I refused to stay broken. And as I rebuilt, I noticed something shifting inside me. For years, I had defined myself by him, by his moods, his decisions, his betrayals. I had measured my worth through the eyes of a man who thrived on making me feel small. But in the aftermath, I realized I didn't need his validation. I didn't need his approval or his recognition. I had fought a battle that most people would never even imagine surviving, and I had come out the other side with my children by my side. That was enough proof of my worth. The whispers in the community didn't stop. Overnight, some people pitied me, others judged me, and a few even dared to defend him. But their opinions no longer carried the same weight. Because when you've stood in front of the truth and refused to look away, the noise of other people's ignorance sounds small. I learned to separate their gossip from my reality. And my reality was that I had built a new chapter out of wreckage, a chapter he no longer controlled. It wasn't just about surviving him, it was about rediscovering me. I started therapy not because I was weak, but because I wanted to grow stronger. I joined a support group for women who had endured betrayal and custody battles, and there I found voices that mirrored my pain, but also voices that reflected my resilience. And slowly, I realized that what he tried to use to destroy me had instead connected me to others who understood survival in its rawest form. Even my children began to change. They became more open, more secure, more willing to laugh again. It was as if they sensed that the tension in our home had lifted. And that joy, those small moments of watching them reclaim their innocence, was the greatest aftermath of all. Because in saving them, I had also saved myself. But make no mistake, the aftermath is not neat. It is not clean. It is not wrapped in a pretty bow. It is messy, complicated, filled with triggers and setbacks. Yet within that mess, there is beauty. Because every time I stumbled, I learned how to stand taller. Every time I doubted, I remembered the courtroom, the look on his face when he realized I wasn't going to break. That memory became fuel, reminding me that I was stronger than the worst thing that ever happened to me. And so the aftermath wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. It was the proof that he could try to strip me of everything, but he could never take away my will to rise again. And that's the lesson I carry now. No one can erase you unless you let them. Now I ask you, if your world crumbled, and the person you trusted most tried to take everything that gave you meaning, would you rebuild stronger? Or would you let their betrayal define your life? When everything was stripped away, when the walls of my world seemed to collapse and I stood barefoot in the ashes of what used to be my life, I thought I would never recover. Betrayal cuts deeper than any wound the body can carry, because it poisons the very trust that once sustained you. And yet, in the stillness of the nights that followed, I began to realize something powerful. Survival was not just about enduring, it was about transforming. The fire that nearly consumed me also burned away everything false, everything fragile, leaving behind the truth of who I really was, a woman who could not be silenced. A mother who could not be broken, a soul that would rise again. I discovered faith in places I didn't expect. In the quiet prayers whispered before dawn, when my children were still asleep, and my heart felt heavy with fear. In the laughter of my kids who reminded me that innocence could survive even the harshest storms. In the mirror, when I forced myself to face the woman staring back, tired, scarred, but still standing. It was in those moments that I understood faith wasn't only about believing in something greater than met, was about believing that I was created stronger than I ever imagined. Inspiration came slowly, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through dark clouds. It was in the realization that my story could be more than a tragedy, could be a testimony. I had the chance to show not only my children, but also myself, that betrayal doesn't define you, loss doesn't imprison you, and silence doesn't last forever. What defines you is the choice you make when you're standing in the ruins. Do you remain in despair, or do you gather the fragments and build a new life, one stronger and more beautiful than before? I chose to build. I rebuilt my strength in layers. First, in small victories: paying a bill without fear, attending a parent-teacher meeting with my head high, waking up without anxiety, tightening my chest. Then, in larger ones, setting boundaries, demanding respect, pursuing dreams I had shelved because I believed I wasn't worthy. And with every step forward, I proved not just to him, not just to the world, but to myself, that I was far more than what had been done to me. I was the author of my own life, and I was rewriting every page. It wasn't easy. Faith doesn't erase the pain, it strengthens you to walk through it. Inspiration doesn't remove the scars, it teaches you to wear them as proof of survival. And healing doesn't erase the past, it allows you to live beyond it. My scars are real. My tears were countless, but so too is my resilience, so too is my victory, and so too is the new woman I have become. Woman who knows her worth, who stands rooted in faith, and who will never again let betrayal silence her voice. To every person who has ever felt invisible, abandoned, betrayed, I say this: you are stronger than you think. You are worthy of love, worthy of peace, worthy of joy. And no matter how broken your story feels, there is always a chapter waiting to be written where you are no longer the victim, you are the victor. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. Do not let anyone take away the light inside you. Even if they try to strip everything away, remember that strength grows in the soil of pain, and that faith is the seed that refuses to die. And that's where my story truly begins. Not in the betrayal, not in the courtroom, not in the moments of despair. It begins here, in this new life I am building, one choice at a time, one step at a time. A life not defined by what I lost, but by what I chose to become. If you have ever carried the weight of betrayal, if you have ever fought to rebuild after devastation, if you have ever had to find your voice again after years of silence, then you already know the truth. We rise. Stronger, we rise. Wiser, we rise unbreakable. And if my journey has shown you anything, let it be this: one can silence a voice that chooses to speak. No one can break a soul that refuses to surrender. And no one can stop a woman who has decided to rise. If this story touched you, if you saw even a part of yourself in my journey, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss the next story that might be the mirror of your own struggles or the spark of hope you've been waiting for. Because in the next video, we'll dive into another story of betrayal and transformation, one that will remind you again that even in the darkest chapters, light is waiting to be found.